This is Offplanet Radio. I'm Randy Maugans. With me on the line right now is my guest. I welcome back to Offplanet Radio my good friend James Horak. James, welcome.
Hello, Randy. It's my pleasure.
James, every time we talk, it's kind of a riddle because I never know what you're going to say. I never know what you're going to bring up. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about, though, is the video that you put out recently. Basically, I would say it was a message to the powers that be, an ultimatum to the powers that be. Tell me a little bit about that video, what inspired you. I know what inspired you, but what was behind that?
Well, as I saw some of the genocidal programs that they've orchestrated in the last few years, it's been going on in Africa for 50 years.
Yes.
But Fukushima was something that I wouldn't have predicted on the scale that it occurred, or the insanity of multiple reactors melting down. And the fact that researchers are beginning to unweave the lies and the distortions about what actually happened and build pretty strong cases for how it was orchestrated, which it was.
Yes.
And there are questions as to why Japan was targeted. Some say it's because they were going to high-grade plutonium to a war grade for Iran. I don't think so. I think that that's one of those halfway half-truths that lie in wait for people that have already vilified Iran in their mind and would say, well, then it's good they stopped them. Well, contaminating the world with radiation and fallout is nothing beneficial about that for anyone, and it's the madness that's on track with turning this world into a place where no one will wish to live. And that ultimatum is based on that principle, that the time is fast coming if things don't change radically, that this will be a place where even the powers that be won't want to live. And they may entertain notions of escaping, but those notions will not be fulfilled.
Are you seeing activity right now that indicates that we're going to turn the tide, that we're going to be able to turn this thing around, James, and get rid of these bastards?
It's quite possible. There has to be a forceful militant opposition. There's just no other way anything like this has ever been brought to change. I firmly believe there's a faction, too, on the inside. I believe that the facilitators have come to a realization that the people they work for are out of their mind, and that if they were successful, which they can't possibly be, this is so counter-revolutionary that there's no way it can succeed, but they can do a lot of damage. They can cost a lot of lives, and they can bring ruination to the world that will make it an extremely untenable place to live. They can do all that, but there's no victory in that, and the madness behind it signals to me that they have created an illusion, a mythological illusion of a superior bloodline and all this. They have inbred what we see is the work of madmen. We see the work of insanity. There's nothing to justify privilege in any of this. And we have catered to them, we have placated them, we have let them dominate us long enough. They have brought us to the 12th hour, and we have nothing left to lose. When people realize that, when they realize that they're 2 months away from a food shortage, possibly, they need to know that the rattlesnake bites before they sit down on it. And that's where we are in all of this.
If you just look right now at the background radiation readings, not even just on the West Coast now, but moving across the country, and I mean, we had background radiation readings here within a month, and I live near Philadelphia, and within a month we were getting high background radiation readings. Our media hasn't talked about this. I have to guarantee you that, people inside the Pentagon, military people, certainly the people who are in the defense and intelligence agencies, these people have families too. And I can't help believe that at some point we reach critical mass where they go, this is insane. I mean, if you just look at the pictures that have been posted on the web from Fukushima, that place is a disaster area. It's destroyed. And the measures they are using to contain this right now are desperate when you begin to read into it.
They were not taking any measures. At Chernobyl, they encased the reactor in graphite. And that was good enough to diminish the radiation, good enough to keep fallout from going up in the air from the fire. There were a number of things they did, but bear in mind that was one reactor. And here is something very significant. At Chernobyl, they did not store spent rods over the reactor cores. We're talking about 17,000 tons of spent rods that are burning or have burnt at Fukushima. The radiation and fallout from that alone escalates in comparison to Chernobyl, this disaster here, by a factor of 25. Just that alone. And I would like to be disputed by one of these nuclear scientists with a little bit of ecological background. I would welcome it.
Well, we know in the past that they basically back away from you because your science, while it is not the standard form of science, is actually fairly tight, and you make good arguments for this. I'd like to hear it, too. I'd offer anybody that wants to have that conversation a microphone anytime.
Yeah, well, there's one thing I still use and revere, which is a tool of science that they shirk away from, and that's probability. I employ probability, and there are a number of scientists that I know are good scientists that would enjoy being able to use probability, but probability is a very embarrassing tool to people that are secret-keeping because it allows you to extrapolate beyond those shut doors. If you utilize probability and you know enough information, it's not much of a leap to the next step. You can make the next step with statistical analysis, and then you can not only do that, but you can determine the likelihood, the degree of likelihood, and you can get it down to where it's almost fact. And when is the last time you heard that? When's the last time you've heard a ufologist take information and analyze it and categorize the type of experience that witnesses have, put it into any kind of statistical format, and come up with figures about what type of craft it is, how often it's been, this type of craft has been in this area and has witnesses, what it did, any landings, and so forth. If you could do that, if ufologists would do that, then they would get an idea that would demonstrate for them this is a complex phenomena. They'll never have a smoking gun. Stop trying to wrap everything up in a nice little tidy package from one event. You're not going to do it.
Well, that's actually what Whitley Strieber said on this show a few weeks ago. We're dealing with things outside of the context of our normal reality. We're dealing with extra-dimensional beings, and we're dealing with things that do not materialize in the way we expect them to.
Yes, and you have some pot stirring by the military-industrial complex to keep everything confused. You have abduction phenomena that they originate, that they conduct. In fact, they can broadcast scenarios off power lines directly into people's minds. They have that technology. They've talked about that technology for 20 years, and I've read classified papers on using power lines as a anti-sedition weapon.
Well, you walked right across the line on this, so I guess we're into this. As you know, I've done significant amounts of interviews and research. I mean, statistically, the amount of research that I've done is nothing. I don't have what I believe a statistician would call a statistical field to work from. A lot of it is eyewitness accounts, anecdotal evidence. But in the threads of all that, James, I've come to some conclusions about it because of a pattern that I see. A consistent involvement by military and underground bases, and that's been one of the things that I keep drawing back to in all of this, is that there's a military involvement in, we'll call them alleged abduction scenarios.
Yes, there is. And there is also a stereotypic scenario that implies EBs trying to speciate or trying to become a species for reproduction and so forth, which is preposterous because, as I've explained before, these are sewn-on chunks of meat with a computer terminal and have no genetic number. And I agree with you on that. But we have people out there who are talking about species of greys, which I think we identify as the extra biological entities.
Is that correct?
Yes. No ET will work with these monsters.
So in the cosmology that you're describing, and based on what you know, and I know a lot of times you don't directly come out and say it, but you do have a level of contact, is it safe to say that the benevolence, the ETs out there, are working on our behalf on one level or another?
Oh, yes. They've averted World War III twice.
Yeah. I kind of suspect they've averted an Iran war, too.
That Iran was one of the targets. Israel was going to launch nuclear weapons against Iran, and nothing would work. Netanyahu flew to Moscow without papers, with no diplomatic pouch, to confront Putin because he couldn't understand that the United States would do that. The Zionists can't admit that there is intelligent life other than them. Ethnic racism taking to psychotic extents. If you don't believe me, read the Talmud sometime.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's a thoroughly racist book full of hatred.
And elitism and regarding everyone that's not a Zionist as a dog. And that you cannot commit a criminal act against the Goyim. They're there for your use and abuse. Yeah,
that is probably the most horrific religious, political, I call it a juggernaut because it threatens everything. It is a self-perpetuating monster.
Yes, and it has created a conflict in the world that is unceasing. I remember when there was peace between the Palestinians and Israel, and the minute that a particular prime minister got in, he decided to betray all the understandings that had been built up and led to this peace. And a holy place, it was a Muslim holy place, he decided to allow entry into tunnels underneath this against the accords that they had, and to open it up to tourists, and violating the understandings, and then they start having problems with the Palestinians again. And if they have a wound, it starts healing. The Zionists will pick the scab off of it and throw acid on it. You know, they originated terrorism.
If you think back in history, and there were hundreds of years where the Dome of the Rock was regularly visited by all three of what we call the Abrahamic religions. And the Muslim guards that stood there would often rotate out in deference to the Hebrews and in deference to the Christians who came there to visit their holy sites. And this is well-recorded history. After World War II, certainly, and maybe even around the time that Herzl began his rumblings, was when you began to see the insurgence of what I call the first stage of radicalism of Islam, which of course also went right through the Nazi Empire.
There were a number of things that have brought that about, but it's been fueled by Mossad. Mossad creates these problems, infiltrates these groups, and fosters this radicalism by its own actions. If you persecute a people, they're going to react. And Americans are going to soon learn that. The rest of the world has learned it from one time or another, but we have been occupied so long ago that we've forgotten what it's like. The rest of the world knows. They know what horse flesh tastes like. They know what other animals that you wouldn't think would be culinary delights taste like, because they have been occupied. They've faced famine. They've faced all these problems, and Americans are going to be confronted with that because that's in the offing. It's virtually inevitable, unless things are immediately turned around before the food shortages start. But what we have is a diminishing food supply, a diminishing potable water supply. Money is
worthless.
Well, we're right on the verge of hyperinflation. You see, that is geared to a schedule, just like everything else that has happened that has served as a false flag, because that's how you make money on it. If you know exactly when it's going to happen because you're making it happen, then you make big bucks on the stock market and on the commodities market with it.
Well, and these guys have done this traditionally. I mean, people went back and traced those who made money off airline stocks right after 9/11. Same thing happened with stocks with BP after the Gulf oil disaster. And isn't it interesting how we'll string people up in this country over what they call insider trading?
Like Martha Stewart, you know.
Martha Stewart.
And, you know, there are probably 25 or 30 inside traders inside BP that ought to be serving time in prison right now. But, you know, BP is British. You know, one of the biggest stockholders in BP is the Queen.
Absolutely.
They're untouchable.
Yeah. They're literally shell corporations. You have the Netherlands hold an oil company and a shell corporation. It's controlled by the royals. It's controlled by London.
Who won't dig those experimental ultra-deep wells in their own territory like the North Sea. They come to the Gulf of Mexico, and a weak puppet president lets them get away with murder. Turns the Coast Guard over to them and lets them intimidate people from finding out what's going on. Journalists, photojournalists are intimidated, threatened to be arrested by our own Coast Guard that is put into the use for BP.
They blacked out the airspace over that whole Gulf area during that time?
They knew that hole was bad. They knew that it should have just been sealed off because it was already bad. The casing was collapsing. They knew that. So they were already digging another one further south that they didn't want anybody to know about because they want to recover their hundreds of millions of dollars by setting up a scheduled catastrophe that they could make all that money with. That wellhead had to be superheated. And in the video that was taken by the fishermen at the time that the rig exploded, you see a blue beam coming down, straight down. That could have been superheating the wellhead. That was at thousands and thousands of feet. It's so cold down there, how could it have been superheated if it wasn't an energy weapon, a pulsed energy weapon? Huh? Answer that.
Yeah. This is, you know, in my mind, James, this was assault on a sovereign living being, that being the earth.
So many times. You go up sometime north of Leadville and look at the mountains that have been shorn down to a settling lake, a lake that's huge, and it's a settling pond for Climax Mines, the biggest molybdenum mine on the continent's right there. Mm-hmm. And they have literally shorn down to thousands of feet mountains. And the rivers and the streams run blue and green from the mineral, even though they have this settling pond. And the EPA will come in and attack an independent miner and keep him out of business by making him perform an environmental impact study while Climax Mines getting away with murder.
James, what do you believe that the origin of evil is on this planet?
Split consciousness.
Let's talk about that a little bit. I knew the answer to it. Maybe explain for this audience, because our audiences change over time. I know we've talked about this before. You did a wonderful interview with Crystal where I think you and her went into this a little bit. Not assuming any prior knowledge, explain to the audience the split consciousness and how that has impacted humanity.
Well, your conscious mind, or let's say your cognitive mind, is split in a subconscious and conscious. The conscious mind is extremely afraid, deathly afraid of the unconscious mind, or the subconscious, because it's not social. And it's not the social mind. It will say things right off the top of its collective memory, and it's a truth monger. And reverse speech, which exists, and which people have proven, and which is the best lie detector there is, because it not only tells you the person is dissembling or prevaricating, but it'll tell you what the truth is. Because when we lie or dissemble, the subconscious corrects us in the reverse. And directly opposite reverse speech, it corrects us, and it corrects us with metaphors. The metaphors are the same for all cultures, all ages. You have children 2 years old that reverse. and they reverse in metaphors that come from mythology they know nothing about. So that right there, you have the first proof that children are born with an access to the collective consciousness through their subconscious, which they can avail a lot better because they haven't been taught to quite yet to fear it. And this fear drives this gap between the subconscious and the conscious further and further apart. Because there is a split there, there's something for hypnotists to work with. And they can suggest to you things that are not real. They can have you believe them. And this farce that says that, oh, well, under hypnosis you wouldn't do anything criminal that you wouldn't do when you're not under is a lie, because they can make you believe that you're protecting your children or whatever by killing someone when that isn't true. There are all kinds of sidesteps that psychologists and psychiatrists and behavioralists use and do to hide their social engineering aspect, what they're hired to do by big corporations. What does a psychologist do in a big corporation? He makes an employer feel that any problem that he's having on the workplace is not because of unsafe equipment or long hours or anything. It's because he's disturbed. And this carries over. Look how long it took them to recognize a disease like black lung or silicosis or radiation poisoning. It's frightening. You know what's going to be the next big scandal, Randy? The next big scandal is going to be when they discover that this epidemic of Alzheimer's isn't an epidemic of Alzheimer's. It's a spongiform encephalitis that is disguised as Alzheimer's to protect the meat industry in America. How can you have an epidemic of a genetic disease? The incidence of it's going to remain constant, isn't it?
So this goes back to mad cow disease, basically.
Spongiform encephalitis is mad cow disease.
Which we don't hear anything about. I mean, 6 years ago, it was all over the place.
Well, look what the English had to do to get rid of it. They destroyed their herds.
Yes, they did. Well, we can't have that in this country because of the way we do meat packing.
But we can have an epidemic of, in quotation marks, Alzheimer's, right?
Yeah. My father had they called it Alzheimer's. It wasn't. And I knew it wasn't. And I knew that the dementia that he had came from something else. But the doctors refused to ever examine that when they were pressed.
Well, this is a case, and have you ever wondered about these rumors about all these microbiologists that are disappearing and being killed?
Yeah, we got another spate of these happening right now, too, I understand.
Oh, yeah. Well, who would be the first person to be able to prove, for instance, and this isn't the only big issue, if there are any biological agents in the chemtrail, this is another thing. Who would it be that would discover it? Microbiologists. Who would be able to discern between spongiform encephalitis and Alzheimer's? A microbiologist.
Now, I got a couple of questions from the chat room here. In which part of the consciousness does guilt reside?
Guilt? You know, that is a great question. Guilt is an indecision between the subconscious and conscious minds. It is one of the links, and it is a key to being able to associate the two, or maybe blend them together, get them closer together. I'll give you a case. You know what we call genius. We call genius for a person to have such an ease in solving problems in a certain particular field, professionally. Imagine being able to do that in anything that you take on. The only reason that you can't is ambivalence, because these people have confidence in their knowledge base. So they can concentrate. They don't stop and say, well, did I do this right? Or, is the house clean? Or all of these things that go on. And you and I both. Don't you know people that you went to school with that couldn't do their homework unless they had cleaned their room and tidied up everything? So, they never could do enough.
Yeah, we call that ritualistic behavior. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, or anal retentiveness.
Or obsessive-compulsive disorder.
Yeah. But to answer that question, this is one of the key relationships that go on consciously in both the subconscious. It's a connection, it's a thread between the subconscious and the conscious mind. It will not let the conscious mind rationalize excuses for having done wrong. And there are people that just don't have it. There are people that do not have this. They're either dehumanized by the way they're raised or they're genetically flawed.
Would you call those people psychopaths? Would you say that
Yes,
is genetically flawed? Yeah.
You have different levels. You have those that are affected that have this behavioral problem. They may be only pathological narcissists. That means they function in the real world. They can assume a demeanor that you would think they were considerate. But if a spouse marries one of these people, they turn up hating them because they know that's just a front, and they find that out pretty quickly. Partners in business with them are lucky to survive. There are all kinds of things that go on with these people. If they are not homicidal, it's because they're afraid of being caught, because they have no conscience whatsoever and can justify any act of violence. And we have so many of these people in government. We have so many of these people that are in high places. You know, they're selected. If the powers that be want a president, they start grooming someone that's got a character flaw a mile long. If you look at Clinton, you know what his character flaw was. If you look at Obama, you know what his character flaw is. But these are the people that they pick out. With Clinton, he was brought up from the age of 12 within the Council of Governors and got a taste for privilege. People say that he's a learned man because he went to Ivy League schools. He didn't have to perform at them.
Interesting. I will just say this on that guilt question. You're right. That was a great question. I think it's interesting that what was built around our culture as well was religious systems that played on this guilt thing, that basically reinforced the split mind even more.
Yes, people that feel guilt come to terms with it. It's like an anomaly. I mean, a scientist that doesn't come to terms with anomaly has lost his professional integrity. When he just puts it up on a shelf, he's no longer a scientist. He's nothing but a paid manipulator of whatever. Look at Carl Sagan, mouthpiece for the establishment, nothing more. Yeah. And, you know, he's one dead I don't mind speaking ill of because he made me disgusted, and this is my opportunity to say something back. We have so many lies that are in our way that everybody has the same right to clarity that anybody else has. Nobody ought to feel like they can deny the truth. And we have let these scoundrels say, well, in the national interests, or, well, we have to sit on this. Where has it gotten us? It has gotten us where now we fear our government. There at no time in any kind of an open society should we fear our government.
Well, ideally we would be our government, but we're not. That was stolen from us.
That's right. It was. And, you know, it was stolen to solve a problem that they had created. They created the Depression. How did they do that? It's real simple. It's no secret. They withdrew investment capital at a time when so many businessmen, so many men were investing in their businesses and expanding that they needed this capital, and they thought they had it, or they would have stopped expanding. It's the same reason that there were oil companies that went down the tubes over the oil depletion allowance, because it overextended in domestic oil. The Western Company is a good example of that. They went down the tubes because they had overinvested in oil leases in Oklahoma. And they couldn't compete with the people that had foreign oil because they were getting an oil depletion allowance and could undercut them. That was the government right there. Have the government in league with big oil.
When we talk about any of this stuff, we always wind up talking about money. It seems to me that we are staring straight in the face right now, given the economic system, with the largest evil in our consciousness, and that is the attachment of intrinsic value to paper and gold and things that we value in a material sense above the spiritual nature of our own integrated consciousness. Would you agree with that or not?
Oh, yes. Let me give you an example of solution. Because until you can offer a solution that's concrete, you don't have as much right to criticize. So I'm going to offer a solution. Remember the bailouts?
Yeah, of course I remember them.
And their $16 trillion that just disappeared, aside from the bailouts, with all the money that has been floated for the benefit of big business, the government could have paid off all of the debt of everyone in this country, their mortgages, their credit card debt, everything, and had money left over to give them. And that would have been one hell of a bonus. It would have gotten people out of all kinds of debt traps that are associated with it, high interest rates, everything. It would have led to a national recovery. And then all these banks that were going under would get their loans back, would get the money. It's a win-win, and that's the thing. It's a win-win for everybody across the board, for everybody, not just the big corporate heads, while everybody else goes down the tube and we face hyperinflation. You see? That's a formula, because there was enough money that was shelled out to these critters that we could have done that. And if you sit down and just figure it out on paper, it tallies up. There's money left over. You can give a bonus to every American. But no, it has to be one-sided. It has to be engineered to make things worse, because they want the economy to go down the tubes. There's no way to recover it. They took away industry. That took away jobs. They have broken the back of every industrial nation, and they're wrapping them up.
Yeah, exactly. I just noted today, I put a post up on my blog, the Russian stock market is now closed indefinitely. Isn't that interesting?
That was predictable. That was predictable. There are people in countries in the world that know what needs to be done. And every time they start to do it, they get assassinated or they get supplanted by another puppet. The pattern has reoccurred so many times and has become so dominant that now people are wise to it. They're wise to it, and they know when this starts going down, they know what to do about it. And they're starting to do. The monsters have been getting away with murder for 75 years, and it's catching up with them. And we need to take it all the way.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And unless we do, this is going to be a world no one will want to live in. There's no other way about it. There's no other way of looking at it. It's a fact. One of the things that you asked me I would want to talk about is privatization of space.
Yeah, let's go there.
Their pie in the sky is that they want to mine asteroids, they want to recover helium-3, and there's no such thing from the moon. They want to do this, they want to do that. All this pie in the sky BS, because they've taken all the dreams on Earth away from the common man, so now they're building dream castles on Mars and the moon and whatever. They can't go there. And if they try the type of exploitation off-planet that they have done on Earth, just imagine this. They've been run off these other places because they've been there. And they're not going to be allowed to go around the corner and do it either. They're not going to be allowed to find refuge after they start their programs of depopulation here. They're not going to be allowed to find refuge somewhere else for the stinking elite.
Can we just agree that this is where the battle has to end, that Earth is really the last battle in order to contain this?
Yes, yes. I tell people, and I'm serious about this, is the finest time to live on this planet. Imagine living back 100 years ago when you saw all this manipulation. You were smart enough and you were knowledgeable enough to see the makings of what's happening now. You saw it then and have no hope that you would live to see a resolution, that you would see justice done. But we live in a time when we're going to see it. We're going to see it, and this makes it spectacular. This isn't the end for anyone because you have an immortal soul. I don't want people being fearful. I don't want people running around screaming and hovering over their children, holding them close, thinking that it's a terrible end and all they have is this mortal shell, because that's not true. But it would be wonderful if we could save this planet, if we could end up holding our heads high, if we could take pride in our experience here and complete something that would lead us out of this cycle of disaster.
Based on our prior conversations and the interview that you did with Crystal regarding the new cosmology that you've been presenting, if we place this effort forward, if we go to the mat now to bring this planet back to righteousness, let's say, do we have assets out there off planet that will be able to clean this place up? And I'm thinking here about your EMVs, the management of solar energy, and I can't help but think that they're waiting for us to move right now so that they can do what they need to do to heal this planet.
Well, they already have. They've already helped you. They've kept a lot of crust movement from much worse disasters. They've also, there was a habit there for a number of years of dumping plutonium waste in the Atlantic Trough where most of your oxygen is produced. One of the things I haven't discussed to any extent is what's being done about that. And there are what I refer to as cities of the sea. And these are biological entities. And they attach to the sides of the Atlantic Trough. And when they're loose, they make up a false bottom that ships pass over. They think they're krill, but they're cities of the sea. Mm-hmm. And they absorb plutonium and ingest it and render it harmless.
Anything that you're currently working on or anything that you project or see coming?
I've had my mind kind of set on something that I'd like to, because there are a lot of things I haven't talked about I'd like to go into detail about. The history of your ancestors is remarkable. And the more you understand about a complex people, the more akin you feel to them. And my time here has been doubly rewarded. And I've seen the effects. When I introduce works of art and literature, music, TET, I don't have to twist their arm to get them to appreciate that.
Well, it sounds to me like we need to schedule some time and sit down and have a talk very soon, James.
Anytime.
And very good. Excellent, my friend. It's wonderful to have you back.
Anytime, Randy.